All down. All silent. Going. Go. So congratulations.
Welcome to the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate. Each episode, we chat with real estate author and industry leader Peter O'Malley to discuss the current property market conditions and provide insights to assist you on your property journey.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Current Market Insights. I'm your host, Kieran O'Brien, and with me as always is Mr. Peter O'Malley. Peter.
Kieran, great to see you.
Good to see you for another week, my friend. It is, I want to say that time of the week, but it's that time of the cycle where the Reserve Bank have sat down and made a decision about how good and or not good our future is going to be as Australians. And given that we're actually recording this on the Tuesday of the Reserve Bank's meeting, I thought it might be a really great opportunity for us to unpick what the Reserve Bank had to say, what their decision was, obviously, around the interest rates and the cash rate, but then just to have a bit of a look through their statement and see if there's any, messages in there of foreboding or any messages of hope, whichever angle we might be able to take out of it.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. So in a surprise to no one, they did increase interest rates by 0.25% today to a cash rate of 4.35%. So we must highlight that pushes mortgage rates to somewhere between 6.25% and 6.6%, you might say.
Yep.
So that's getting right up there. Interest rates are now back to their equal highest that they've been in the last sort of 13, 14 years. Mortgage rates are.
Yeah.
So that's not welcomed. A couple of takeouts from the statement by the Reserve Bank after their meeting. They mentioned it was a fairly brief statement.
Yep.
We've often said, hey, let's not listen to the commentators commentating on the statement and everyone puts their own sort of political bent on it. Let's just read it ourselves and get our own takeouts from it. This was a really, really boring statement that didn't tell you much. Trying to nitpick at it and take things out of it. I guess a couple of the takeouts is they mentioned the Middle East 4 times.
Yep.
And the reason I point that out is that what you are going to see increasingly from here, particularly after the budget next week, is the Liberal Party are going to try and blame the federal government for the inflation that's in the economy and mismanagement of the economy and everything that goes with it.
As they do every cycle.
Both
sides.
But both sides. They're always attacking each other, but I'm just talking about where the point of attack is. So The Liberals are going to aim, and already are, but increasingly they will, because this budget that's coming next week is going to hit Australians. That much is clear now.
Yeah.
So the Liberal Party are going to aim to connect the pain that Australians will feel from the budget with Labor's mismanagement of the domestic economy.
Yeah.
The Labor Party are going to say, we're managing the economy fine. This is a global conflict we've got no control over. And if it weren't for the global conflict, we'd have things under control.
Yeah.
And they're both probably a little bit right in some ways. There's no way you can give the Labor Party an A+ for their management of the economy. You just can't.
No, and I think they, it's often said, right, that the Liberals are the kind of branch of government that will try and, shrink the government size and be a little more economically responsible, if you could use that phrase, and then Labor spends and taxes, which they have shown to be true in this current government. But I think there is certainly an element, if the Reserve Bank is saying it, there is some element that there is global influence on what's happening locally. But we can't, we've often said Labor's overspend, for example, is one of the major drivers of inflation locally. So there is some element of their mismanagement here.
Well, I went into reading this statement with no view from the RBA today.
Yeah.
And the RBA clearly gave the government, in my view, some coverage to say straight from the horse's mouth, the Middle East is the cause of today's rate hike, not our mismanagement of the economy or our overspending. The other one, which was interesting in the RBA statement, they said the baseline forecast assumes the Middle East conflict is resolved soon and fuel prices decline, which sees underlying inflation peaking higher than was expected back in February. It then declines as demand growth slows and capacity pressures ease in response to higher interest rates. That's the base case, that the war is over soon. People need
It's
to
a little
know
bit
that.
optimistic, right? I mean, if you take the commentary out of the US government, particularly from the office of the executive, you could believe it's over or accelerating at any different point in the day, right? I don't think there's any clear, 1 minute it's over, the next minute it's on again, and then they're negotiating, but they're not. It seems to me a little bit, not careless, but a little bit odd to just make an assumption that may or may not have any backing in fact. I don't know.
I was really surprised that was the baseline forecast, because it doesn't. I'd like the conflict to finish, tomorrow.
Yeah.
But if we just go to today's events, and things do change daily, but Iran went back to attacking the UAE today.
Yeah. It's like, I don't see how they've just come to that conclusion that it must all be over and then we'll be fine. And even so, I mean, there is always, maybe I'm just slightly pessimistic on this, but there is a lag in any of these corrections. Just because, let's say the conflict ends tomorrow, supply chains don't immediately return to pre-war capacity. The domestic supply certainly doesn't return to pre-war capacity. I mean, it takes time for all of this to recover. I don't see that inflation says, oh, well, we're all over now and everyone just stops panic buying fuel and prices come back down. I mean, it's not that simple. There's no way it's that simple.
Oh, that's right. You saw that coming out of COVID with the
course, yeah.
the shipping containers, stocked up on the docks there in I think it was LA.
Yeah.
And it took months and months to clear the backlog.
And some of the prices have never come back down from COVID.
Yeah.
So, this kind of blind ignorance that all of a sudden fuel will just go back to what it was per barrel and per litre, at the Bowser, I think is naive.
Oh, it's extremely naive,
Yeah.
but that'll come out in time. So, interesting statement, pretty light on, but interesting that they would choose that as the baseline. And if that is their baseline, that would suggest that if our view of the war, meaning it's nowhere near close to a full and proper resolution, it takes hold, inflation's going to go above what the RBA, truly expected it to.
Yeah.
And it just shows you, anyway, we're not military analysts. Well, I'm certainly not. But, Trump is, spruiking as though it's kind of funny that there's no leadership left to negotiate with in Iran. And he's proud that he's the cause of that.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, how are you going to get the genie back in the bottle if you don't know who to negotiate with? You've cut the head of the snake off.
Yeah, it seems to look. We're not here to discuss, U.S. foreign domestic policy, but I think that's one of their attitudes, right? Is just throw all the marbles out there and see if one of them lands in the cup. But I don't, who knows what's going to unfold there? I think though, as an economy, we're probably in for a bit more pain before it gets any easier. I like to hope we're not too far off the peak, as it were, but. I don't think we're through this yet, that's for sure.
No, that's right. And I think people who are transacting in the property market now need to factor in, whether they're buying or selling or doing both, that there will be further rate hikes to come. There's little doubt about that, particularly if that's the RBA's base case. That's not to say the RBA will necessarily go ahead and hike in June.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the RBA has no control over things that are driving inflation at the moment, whether it be government spending or a global conflict. And the government are saying that they're going to pull back on spending. The US is saying the war's coming to an end, but neither of those things, to any reasoned person that are watching both of them, would suggest that either of those two claims are true. So I think we could see inflation continuing to run harder than everyone would like in the second half of the year, and that will play a role in the property market.
Yeah, it certainly will. Just one quick question for you before we move on. Do you think that the government have put pressure on the RBA in terms of how they word this statement? And I only kind of reflect on recent statements, even going back last year, where they often made comment to all of the domestic elements that were driving inflation. They've always been very deliberate in obviously not covering off every element, but certainly painting the picture of what the domestic metrics are that drive inflation. And all, not always, but lots of them are centred around government policy and government activity, but they've been quite deliberate this time to not pin blame on the government. Do you think that's a deliberate choice, or is that pressure from Jim Chalmers and his Treasury leading into the budget to not have some negativity floating around the current expenditure, that mindset?
Kieran, anyone who really wants to know the answer to that question, I would direct them to the podcast that Mark Burris and Christopher Joy did last week.
Yep.
Christopher Joy touched on this topic in some detail. And the reality is the governor of the RBA, Michelle Bullock, was handpicked by Jim Chalmers.
Yeah.
And he gave a really good breakdown of how that works. As a real estate agent, I'm in no position to have any sense
of
the machinations between the treasurer of the day and the governor of the Reserve Bank, which is why I found Christopher Joy's breakdown of the issue in that podcast really, really interesting. And the entire podcast is fantastic, actually, well worth a listen.
Well, I'll make sure to I'll link it in this episode for our listeners to have a listen, and I'll certainly catch it myself. Regardless, another unfortunate decision from the RBA, not an unexpected one, but unfortunate for consumers because it certainly is a tough time out there. But onward and upward, as we say. I'd love to move forward tonight, Peter, and just then off the back of the RBA, talk a little bit about what is happening in the market broadly, what your kind of insights are, what you're seeing, and particularly, what are the measures in the property market specifically that are likely to be impacted by the current climate. I saw an article today that mentioned that, we talked about last episode that the government is tinkering in some ways or toying with the idea pre-budget of tinkering with particularly investments in property and, putting taxes that may be considered quite punitive to some investors. And we've talked a little bit about what the flow-on effects might be. But the article that I read today was suggesting that one of the hardest things to be hit immediately from some of these changes is going to be the rental market. You've been saying that for quite some time. But given that we've now got interest rate figures that are new, we've got some more insight into what's happening in the budget. What do you think in the current climate and then with the predictions is likely to be the outcome in the rental space?
Oh, look, I think if they did nothing with property in the budget, the rents would still rise. So rents up until the end of March or the beginning of April in Sydney are up 7.4% for the year.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Absolutely crazy. So when people, regular listeners to our podcast, were hearing me over the last 18 months saying the rental crisis is not over and it's not actually a rental crisis yet, it's just a fully priced market, what I meant is that what has happened this year now qualifies as a fully fledged rental crisis where vacancy rates in Sydney are 1.1%, down 1.3% from the month before, so falling vacancy rates. The average house in Sydney, this is all of Sydney, not the inner west, is $1,150 a week.
Yeah, which is crazy, again.
And as I say, rents are up 7.5% or 7.4% to be exact in the first 3 months of the year. And the government are coming out with policies that demonise landlords further, meaning incoming landlords are going to be less inspired to partake in the property market. Existing landlords, I know, because we've been selling them off for landlords for the last 4 years, are bailing, shrinking the rental pool. At the same time, the government have got the, Sydney airport wide open for people to come in through the gates as much as they want. So, the government doesn't seem to know or care how a market reacts, and both federal and state governments have put Band-Aid solutions into markets trying to, stem the bleeding of an artery with a Band-Aid when it comes to the rising rental market, but it's just going to keep going from here.
One of the comments you made in one of your recent articles was that you think the current trajectory that homelessness is a real concern for a lot of people. Now, I think Australia has always, at least in my 40-odd years on Earth, we've always experienced a relatively secure housing space. Most people have access to accommodation if they need it. We certainly have homeless, but it's certainly not as prolific as some other nations is, I guess, what I'm kind of getting at. But given what you're talking about, vacancy rates are cripplingly low at a time when rents are rising and the average rent is obscene, realistically, for a family to afford. you mentioned that it's a possibility. I mean, how likely do you think it is that we could actually see, financially forced evictions and true homelessness in Sydney?
Thank you for raising the question. I did put that there, and even writing it. It was like some people are going to take issue with this and think it's melodramatic, but it's not. Homelessness is coming to this country. Now, let me define homelessness for you, Kieran. I'm not talking about the poor tramp sitting down in Pitt Street with a bottle, a Darwin stubby in a brown paper bag, sleeping on a piece of cardboard asking for a handout.
Yeah.
When you talk homelessness, that's unfortunately for people who are in that situation, that's the vision that comes, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking homelessness, people that live in a home and get priced out of a home into a caravan.
Yeah.
People that live in a home and have to basically go and live in someone's granny flat or going back to their parents' granny flat or living under the house because they can't afford a home anymore. I was hearing fairly soon after COVID about the homelessness in Queensland, and I thought it was just people upset that they couldn't get a 4 or 5 bedroom house on the beach in Queensland and come on, you've got to sacrifice a bit. And I had a meeting on the Sunshine Coast and I was up there and I saw it with my own eyes, families that were sleeping in the car in the back of, 4-wheel drive type cars and they were using the surf club's bathroom facilities that's how their showers were happening.
Yeah.
Living in, moving into caravans, that sort of thing. So let's not think that people are moving from, a Western standard home to sleeping on a piece of cardboard in Pitt Street is what we're referring to when we say homelessness. We're saying families that might live as a unit, as a single unit entity and they're happy are getting priced out due to a lack of dwellings and they're going into that, what would have previously been considered B grade or unacceptable living, which is essentially homelessness because they can't afford to live in a home. That's where the government is taking people. And right at the start of Anthony Albanese's second term, I said, and I'll say it again, the people that voted for him, which is the young adults, and he told them, and Chris Minns said the same thing, I'll fix the housing crisis, are going to be bitterly disappointed at the end of his term because every solution that he comes up with makes it worse. And that's where we are right now.
And, if I remember correctly at the time, you also said they're the ones that are going to be most likely the first stung by these policies.
Correct.
Because they are the younger, traditionally lower earning at this stage in their life, less supports around. You've talked often about having to move into a share house and find a solution to get a rental anywhere near your work, which if you're 20 and, have absolutely no considerations outside of your work and home or whatever, that might be feasible. But as you say, for a family of 5 or a family of 3 even, it's not necessarily an option to just go into our flat share with 2 uni students on the Gold Coast. It comes in all forms.
We regularly see 40-year-olds who pack up and move back with their elderly parents.
I work with someone and had the conversation today, actually, that they had to move back home because they can't afford to find somewhere on their own, which, again, they could theoretically go into a share accommodation, but can't find somewhere to live on their own, so they've had to move back in with their parents.
Well, that's homelessness,
as
Kieran.
A fully employed, adult person.
That's homelessness. We don't define that as homelessness.
Yeah,
but that's homelessness. You're a mature age adult they've got a professional job.
Yeah. That's a doctor, yeah.
And they've got to go and take a room in someone's house, that's someone being their parents, but that's homelessness.
Yeah.
That's coming en masse. It's already breeding, but it's coming en masse on the trajectory that we're on.
One of the suggestions I saw, and one of the things that we're not fully exploring in this episode, but the government tinkering with investments, etc., one of the things they're talking about is reducing the capital gains tax exemptions and reducing the benefit you get. I saw a suggestion, I think it was last night, that said if the government just stopped or removed that policy or put a temporary hold on it as a grandfathered measure, then a range of investors would sell out at a reduced price because they would no longer have to factor in capital gains losses. Now, to me, again, that seems quite naive to suggest that they would just suddenly sell for a loss because they're not paying tax. I mean, do you think that if the government made all these announcements and said, look, we'll give you 12 months to action any sales that you might want to do as an investor to free up, and we won't charge you capital gains tax at all, do you think that that would actually free up enough supply to have any tangible benefit in Sydney?
No, because of the amount of people they're inviting into the country.
Yeah, so we still have a rapidly increasing demand with, that would free up trivial supply, realistically.
That's right, trivial supply. And the government needs to stop fiddling at the fringes if that was a solution as such. And they need to do one of two things: stop people coming into the country at the rate they are, or start building more properties. Now, the private sector cannot and will not build the properties the government want them to build because it's unfeasible at the moment.
Yeah.
I think we discussed it in the last podcast on a micro level. If you scan real estate ads at the moment, you will notice how many properties with DA approvals are being sold because it's unfeasible for one family to put a top on their property. So they're saying, let's sell this one and buy another one. So the government have this wrong. And the only way that you'll see a sharp increase in supply is if the government funded, and that will put further pressure on the budget. And
not according to the RBA. That's only Iran that's putting pressure on the budget.
Well,
right. At least this month,
I think the RBA would be beside themselves if the federal government got involved in funding housing projects, given what they're doing in the infrastructure space at the moment. So what I'm saying there is that is a solution in theory, but it's not going to happen.
It's also like incredibly long term. Even if they were to ramp up huge amounts of federal money to supply or to facilitate supply, it still takes a long time to get all of that into a turnkey kind of perspective. Right. Whereas the faster solution, realistically, is to stop influx at this point.
And that is why
but it's the unpopular one.
Well, who's it unpopular?
Well, I think it's the more unpopular one because
it's unpopular with the government. I don't think it's unpopular at all.
Yeah,
I think when you look at the right side of politics, whether it's the Liberal Party, the Liberal Democrats, or the One Nation Party, they are all looking to own that space at the moment.
Yeah,
and they will get traction with it because people don't want the new arrivals into Australia at the rate that they are coming in at the moment. So all of this housing debate always comes back to the same point, no matter which way you spin it, no matter which academic you put in a room and say, come up with a policy solution for us, it always comes back to the same point. We can't build houses quick enough. Stop letting so many people in at once so the market can recalibrate. And the solution to this, as people have probably heard through the media, is Canada. That's a left-wing government, so we're not taking any right-wing, position on this. Canada, left-wing government, started under Justin Trudeau, followed through with Mark Carney, cut down on immigration, and suddenly their rental market dropped 20%, and people who grew up in Canada can now afford to live in Canada.
Yeah.
In their own home.
Which is obviously the goal. I mean, it's a basic human right, to have accessible shelter. I always use the analogy, if the water's coming in faster than you can swallow, you will eventually drown. And that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're at a point where we just can't keep up, and it's we're getting waterboarded, and we're not dealing with it at all. And the fallout is all those young people that are going to the workforce, all the elderly that can't maintain the upkeep on their home. Like it's unfortunately the extremes of age and kind of professional career point that are impacted the most by this. It's not the middle class family that's got two incomes and kids that are grown up because they're pretty secure. It's the ones on the edges, which are the most vulnerable typically.
That's right. And, once upon a time it was a tragedy when a young person couldn't afford to buy a house. Yeah. Now it's a tragedy when a young person can't afford to
rent a house.
A house. That's where it's got to.
That's grim.
So that's why I say the next stage of this is homelessness.
Well, let's hope it doesn't get to that, Peter. Hopefully Albo and his team are listening, and Chris Minns' team is listening. Moving through then, as we kind of get towards the end of the episode tonight, we always talk about auction clearance rates, and particularly Louis Christopher's research, because we prefer SQM research's more accurate figures here. Last time we spoke, the auction clearance rate was precariously low and had been lingering low for a little while. And I think I, mentioned or referenced how in year or so gone by, you had often talked about a persistent auction clearance rate below 50% was a sign of disaster in the property market. And I'm sure last time
price falls.
Price falls, that's right.
Falls,
It's the significant indicator that something is wrong. And I'm sure last time we talked about...
price falls are a function of a market. They go up some days, they go down on others. I don't put any emotion as a real estate agent around falling prices are disastrous. You've just touched on a point there that is the Labor Party trying to manufacture price falls to make property prices more affordable. That's what they've done in Victoria.
Well, I think that's absolutely the goal of left-wing government in general, right?
Yeah, they've achieved it in Victoria.
Yeah,
because it's of the major capitals, Victoria has gone from being the second most expensive capital in Australia to about the fifth or sixth.
Yeah.
Because government policy has driven property prices down. So, I don't come to the table, and I don't think any reasoned analysis should come to the table with emotional words around it. This is a classic market downturn where auction clearance rates are not stuck below 50% at the moment, Kieran. They're stuck below 40%.
Yeah.
The auction clearance rate has been in the 30% range for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
With no sign of bouncing.
It's the longest, certainly, in the time that we've been talking about it, and the longest in my memory. I know there have been other periods where there have been, clearance rates like this, but it's certainly an indicator that the market is not heading in the direction many people would like. But potentially is heading in the direction that a bunch of others would like, right? I guess the question then really is, as I always ask you, how likely, or based on the auction clearance rate as it is right now and the climate that you're seeing, how likely is it that there will be any price corrections or price reductions across the market more broadly?
Well, Alex Phillips is widely acknowledged as Australia's number one real estate agent. And I heard him say on a podcast this week that 20% of the sales that he's making in the eastern suburbs, 20% of the sales the vendors are selling for a loss.
Wow.
That's already.
That's all, and they're like on big baselines typically in the east, or bigger baselines in the east.
There is a surprisingly affordable, relatively speaking, segment of the eastern suburbs. Like he was talking in the podcast about someone who I think who purchased for 1.3 and sold for 1.2 so they could upgrade, and the wisdom of doing that in this market, which he was absolutely right. But I think again, Chad, who produces our podcast for us, he was shocked about 6 weeks ago when he saw his first property, sell for less than the owners had paid for it in Balmain. It's like, I didn't know that happened. It's like, it sure does. And, we might be seeing more of it. Now, I don't want to compromise anyone, but there's more than one property out there at the moment in the inner west that's on the market for less than the owners have paid. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and, it's only going to become more prevalent, or at least more kind of visual, at least, with the, government and Fair Trading's proposed changes to how properties get sold. Like, people are going to see that this is happening, whereas I think it's been something of an industry or kept secret that many properties are selling below, because I think most consumers aren't doing the research that far back to necessarily know what's happening.
No, but that's right. And can I go back to the RBA statement where they say the baseline forecast assumes that the Middle East conflict is resolved soon and fuel prices decline, and sees underlying inflation peaking, a little bit higher than where it was. The concern about that is if the baseline forecast doesn't play through, and this war has legs, like we thought the Ukraine-Russia war might be over in a matter of time, and here we are,
years later,
4.5 years later, or coming up to 4.5 years later. If this continues, oil prices go to the moon, inflation goes to the moon, and there's a scenario where a hard crunch is being set up.
Yeah. It's the only time will tell. As we close off tonight, then, Peter, just thinking about your article you put out about the current market, etc. Any tips out there? Any particular kind of traders in the market that have got a bit of beneficial period ahead. Clearance rates are low. Are there buyers out there? It's a bit of a weird time, and I think it's affecting both sides. Are there any winners or losers, pragmatically speaking, at the moment in the market?
Oh, look, there's a great saying, upgrade in a down market.
Yep.
Yes, your $2 million property might be only worth 1.85 now, but if the $3 million property you thought you couldn't afford has dropped to 2.7 million, well, suddenly you've made up $150,000 on the trade in raw numbers.
Yeah.
So falling market doesn't hurt everyone. Rising market doesn't help everyone. The other one is be very careful about buying before selling.
Yep.
If the property you're selling is designed to fund the purchase, because all of the well wishes at your dinner party saying your house is lovely, you'll have no problem selling this, that doesn't mean an iota.
Not many are buying it at that table.
That's right. Once the signboard goes up out the front, you are subject to market forces.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't imagine anyone would like to be on bridging finance in the middle of a rising interest rate cycle and inflationary pressures. That would be a lot of stress to put on top of an already stressful time.
Oh, absolutely, Kieran. Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, look, really great chat tonight, Peter. It's unfortunate news out of the RBA, but as we've said over the last few weeks, certainly not unexpected. Let's hope that next time we talk about Michelle Bullock, it will be in more positive light, although I'm not that optimistic. As always, I appreciate you coming in and talking with us and our listeners.
Thanks, Kieran.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks to everyone for listening to Current Market Insights. We look forward to speaking with you next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate, the podcast providing real estate insights you won't find anywhere else.